And this is our final set of presentations and discussions for the conference. So we're in the home stretch. I'm excited this afternoon to have three really interesting research presentations. We have David Lazer first, and then we have Jonathan Nagler, and then we have Mindy Romero. Each will have 20 minutes, and as has been our standard practice throughout the conference so far, those who are participants and can see the chat, please feel free to have a conversation and post your comments and questions there. Members of the audience, please feel free to post comments in the Q&A. And with that, I'll turn it over to David. Thank you for joining us today.
It is my pleasure. And let me just pull up my slides. Can you see my slides okay? All right. Let me just first, again, send my best wishes to everyone at Caltech and in LA more generally. And I feel terrible for what everyone has been through the last week. So let me, and it's, I appreciate the efforts of the organizers, Mike, Betsy, Sabrina, to quickly switch to an online format, and I think this has been terrific. I'm going to talk a little bit. Actually, it's not so much a research presentation on research results, although there will be a few in there. I want to talk about research infrastructure, in particular research infrastructure to study the internet. And I'm going to begin with a kind of discussion of what we've relied on data to understand the internet, and offer a potential and argue that we're in a bit of a crisis currently. And then I'm going to shift gears and talk about a potential partial solution, the National Internet Observatory. Very briefly, I think that we're in a kind of crisis in the field because of the shutdown of access to Twitter data, which has been the mainstay of the field for a while, but also shutdown of other API, shutdown of CrowdTangle, and elimination of other access to data. That really what we've relied on to study the internet has been disappearing over the last year and a half or so. I think research continues on old data, but that's not going to sustain us for long. So today's story is basically a case for that the disappearance of Twitter is a disaster for the field in particular, but also that it was in bad shape before because we spent too much time, ironically, looking at Twitter. And I think discussing what are potential answers, in particular, talking about the National Internet Observatory, which I don't think solves all problems, but I think could be a big part of the solution. So first, I begin with the premise. Obviously, we've been talking about a lot of different kinds of research in yesterday and today. I think research on the internet is particularly important because it is such a dominant way that people get information. It blows my mind that that TikTok, for example, the Supreme Court upheld the ban of TikTok. In 2 days, we will be shutting down in the US one of the dominant sources of information for younger people, right? That roughly 4 in 5 young people use TikTok, and that's going to be shut down, and that's where we are. But what happens on the internet, it matters because so much of life is now mediated. Well, gosh, look at what we're doing right now. So much of life is mediated through the internet, and a science of internet-based behavior is a much improved science of human behavior. And so this is my starting point. If you disagree, I'm happy to discuss that. I want to just give a little case study on how reliant we've been on Twitter in particular. I just looked at, this is based on a survey of the top 3 journals in political science, and what were the sources of internet-based data there, what are the trends over time, what would the platforms look like, what were the phenomena that were looked at. And I should note this isn't complete over the last year or so, but generally there's been an upwards trend, unsurprisingly, in internet-based research over the last 15 years, starting from essentially zero, to being a fair, given that we're talking about 3 journals, to being a fair amount. And I think that actually would continue if we had completed the data collection. The curve would have continued upwards for 23 and 24. And so is the disappearance of Twitter a disaster? Well, when we look at the sources of data, yeah, I mean, almost 80% of these papers relied on Twitter data. There was also Facebook used in some of these. Some of these were multi-platform papers, but Twitter was by far the dominant source of data for political science research. I should note, I've been working with a number of people on a larger review of all social science research using social media data, and this is a similar story across all the social sciences. Twitter just dwarfs everything because it was so easily accessible. So disappearance of data as a resource for studying online behavior is a disaster. Yes, with an asterisk, because the asterisk wasn't so great before. So, I'd say that the research community has perhaps been focused on not quite the right things, good things, but not the right things. Most of this research was focused on the production of information, tweets that you see, not tweets that you share, not tweets that you see, because that's what was accessible. You could see what was shared. You couldn't see what people saw. And then there was a non-trivial amount that was looking at following for various reasons, following from a particularly influential paper by Pablo Barbera, but very little on consumption. And how does that compare to what people do on platforms? Well, I'm not going to go into this too much, but there was a big survey we did asking people how much time do they spend on platforms? Do they post on platforms and so on? So first of all, note that if you look weighted by time, that Twitter is a pretty tiny slice of the pie. It has its value. I've certainly argued to reviewers, having published research using Twitter data, that there is substantial value to Twitter data, but it's a very tiny slice of what's going on the internet. But furthermore, most people don't do much. They're not sharing much content on platforms. So if you look at Twitter, we asked you how much do you post, and the biggest category is never, and then a lot, then it's less than once a month, about once a month. Most of Twitter posts, we'd guess, come from roughly 1% of users. That is incredibly unrepresentative of certainly unrepresentative. I could show you other data and what people even see. So what is tweeted is actually not representative of what is seen, because people who tweet a lot are not necessarily getting their content seen a lot. And this is true to a greater or lesser extent with other platforms, more so with YouTube, for example, and a lot less so with instant messaging platforms. But even with instant messaging platforms, there's this vast inequality of posting behavior, and what is posted again is not as what is seen. So if we were to say what was being studied in the black area is all of social media, this is roughly right. The white square is what the set of phenomena around posting on Twitter. And in some ways, we've been the drunks in this parking lot looking for our keys in the white square. But we've gone from that to this. That is a disaster. It's much worse. But the status quo ante was pretty awful. So had we been focused on the right things, I'd argue not so much. And I speak as one of the community that we've been talking about the attention economy, and we haven't been studying attention, or we've been rarely studying attention. So what are our alternative models for data? I think the answer will ultimately be some mix of these four: bespoke data collection, collaborating with companies, encouraging data sharing by companies through policy. But I think there are some pros and cons to all of these. I'm going to talk about the fourth one: building a shared infrastructure for data collection, because anything we collect is very expensive to collect. Better that we do something bigger once that's usable by many people. I'd argue. And so we collaborators and I at Northeastern got a large infrastructure grant, $16 million grant from the National Science Foundation to build the National Internet Observatory. And this has been my primary job for the last several years. And the NEO model, the National Internet model, is to get volunteered source data with shared infrastructure. I'll note my co-PIs on this, Krista Wilson and Dave Chofnes. I also want to thank the NSF for their support. Of course, none of the opinions or conclusions, et cetera, I say here represent the views of the NSF. So the project objective is to collect data from a large number of consented, paid and unpaid participants. And the objective idea is to look over their shoulders, to see what they see, and then measure, which allows us to both understand to some extent, although they're sort of hard to disentangle, people's choices and the role of algorithmic curation, right, in a real world setting. And then put all those data and carefully curate them and make them available to third-party researchers in an ethical and privacy-preserving fashion. And the exciting element to this is that we can get this exposure and consumption data from many platforms that is user focused. So we can look at users across many platforms, see what they're seeing, as well as seeing what they're posting. And we can link this to survey data. So we're having people answer sort of your basic survey stuff. We can even do behavior triggered surveys as useful. And through this also investing in truly informed consent in a way that is not, typical of the field. And I think there's a lot of strengths to this, and I'll give you some preliminary glances of the data. The tricky thing here, the challenging thing here, unlike Twitter data, which you can get people who are, this is both a good thing and a bad thing about Twitter data. You're getting data from people who have not consented to their data being looked at. Well, that's ethically problematic potentially, but you eliminate selection issues, right? That you don't have to worry about, well, who would let you see all their posts on Twitter? Well, like anybody, really. And so, like I said, that is a bit of an ethical conundrum. But at least it dealt with a methodological conundrum. Here we have to worry about what's the weird sample that we get that agrees to our data collection. And so that is, I will discuss that a little bit. But this is a schematic, and this, going from left to right is sort of the technical systems. Participants send data to a data warehouse, which is then processed and sent to a distributed analysis cluster. Researchers can send queries and get results. The red elements are all of our sort of ethical regulation, ethically informed regulation. We have a very robust consent process. Subjects have to pass a quiz if they're going to participate to show that they truly understand the intrusiveness of our data collection. We borrowed a lot from health-related research because we consider it sort of on par with delicate, sensitive social data. And then researchers have to go through actually extra ethical training and so on, because standard IRB stuff does not cover the kinds of ethical issues that these data raise. And so this gives you a sense on the survey side, data collected, all these kinds of survey data, behavior data, we get browsing data, we get HTML snapshots from a large set of platforms, so we can see what is happening within platforms. We get stuff on browser state. And then we also get a different set of data from mobile. Mobile has a very different set of formatted data, so it's annoying as hell because mobile data is different from desktop data, and Android data are different from iOS data, and researchers will have to figure out how to that's the reality of data collection. It is, on the desktop, it's multi-device type, Chromium-based browsers, Android and iOS. We surged our data collection. Last year we were collecting like like 2023, you're collecting data from around 1,000 people. Around the election, we surged our data collection, collected data from around 7,000 people simultaneously during the lead up to the election. All this was coupled, of course, with the survey stuff. We have a lot of ethics and researchers access stuff, and we don't have much time, so I want to zip through this. But there is this whole process where you apply to access will apply for access. We're still getting the access part off the ground. There's a code of conduct. There's a data use agreement, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to talk about some of the representation issues. We can see that this gives you a sense. This is actually not quite our latest version of the data. This is from October sometime. Our data tilts towards the more educated. It underrepresents Hispanics. It underrepresents older people. It has fairly decent racial balance between whites and blacks, all things considered. However, we do have, even for the underrepresented categories, our samples are big enough where we have useful size of the underrepresented subsamples, meaning, for example, weighting could be effective. Obviously, the concern is how are things missing from the things we're not observing? We have various guardrails to evaluate against, for example, ANES survey data compared to our survey data on internet use, and we're developing other kinds of comparators. We, as I noted, underrepresent conservatives and overrepresent liberals. Unfortunately, this is just a thing also with survey research more generally. So just to give you a sense of the kinds of descriptors we've already dug out, we can see, for example, how many people use LLM services. We can see, for example, on the left is how many people have used ChatGPT versus other LLM services. We can see ChatGPT is dominant, and then Gemini is the second most one. And then if we look at how much time, how many times they visit, we can see something like Copilot essentially disappears. People go to Copilot once, and then they stop going back, that kind of thing. And so that gives you, this is browser-based, and it gives you a sense that it's capturing real phenomena. We can look at sort of the interesting age gradient. Younger people are using LLMs. Different, interestingly, for Copilot, has the opposite trends. My guess is because Copilot is driven by Microsoft, which is more of a corporate driver to usage. But you can see even the hints of things, although we're not even delving into what are people doing on LLMs, but we are indeed collecting and getting full HTML snapshots of what's happening in LLM products. We can look at browsing data in various kinds of ways, and so we can say, wow, let's look at the New York Times. How do people get to the New York Times? Well, it turns out Google's important, and it turns out mail is super important, and probably newsletters and so on. But this is interesting to understand the attention economy, how people get from one place to the other. You can see, Fox is a bit different, and Facebook looms larger, for example, for Fox. And then you could say, where does Google News send people? And actually, Google News sends people everywhere. It's just it's very heterogeneous. It's sort of an interesting little thing. I'm not saying that's a deep insight. You can look into search, and I want to give you a sense of here's a paper we published 2 years ago in 2023, looking at what people saw on Google when they searched. This was a pre-version of our infrastructure. We did data collection 18 and 20, and we found, and we were looking at what does Google show people, and what do they click on? And what we found was Google's very diverse. It does shows liberals and conservatives pretty similar stuff, but liberals click on the liberal stuff and conservative the conservative stuff. And so, but this project, this paper, I'd estimate cost around $250,000 to produce. It was very expensive because the data collection, the fixed cost of our data collection was very expensive. It took years to produce. It took 5 years from our initial data collection to publication. We were able to reproduce this paper and all the results at 10 times the scale of data with 2 weeks of effort and almost zero marginal cost. So that's the difference that this infrastructure can make. To give you a sense of mobile app, we can see when you get less information, but you can see what apps people use, and you can use, you can see difference in age range. So what social media are people using by age range? Facebook is older people, and then it's a very different story for younger people. That makes sense. But we can also then dive in to apps using the accessibility API. So I know my time's about up. we are stress testing the infrastructure now. But if you're interested, we have a sort of wait list. So we're also happy to integrate NEO data into NIH. Actually, we've integrated into a number of NIH proposals already. So reach out to us if you're interested. You can go to the website. You can take a snapshot of this fancy way to get to the website. But in any case, I've talked too much as it is. But I hope that this is of service to the community. And thanks for your patience.
Awesome, David. Thank you. To be honest, I don't think you've talked anywhere near enough about it, but we'll circle back to talk more about this in the Q&A. Next up, Jonathan Egler.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank Mike and Betsy and Sabrina and Leslie for doing all this under what are really just horrific circumstances. So I'm super impressed with your ability to focus on this and pull it off. And from the user perspective, it's been a great conference. So thank you. Okay, let me try and share the right part of my screen here and sort of get to it. Okay, I'm hoping that you can see a slide that says elections and information. So this is going to be an odd talk, and Mike, please shout or something about time. I'm going to sort of be all over the place. I'm going to try to review some older stuff, which I'm doing in part because you didn't get nearly as much of the new stuff done as I would like. And then we'll get to things on 2024. Talking about a mix of information and coming back to our favorite topic, the economy, because I was super interested in inflation and people's perspective on inflation and things. So let me briefly talk about what we've done before with social media and essentially what we're trying to continue in 2024. So in 2016, like we were interested in these basic questions about what are people following on Twitter? Whoops. And is that related to their change in perceptions over the course of the campaign? And what we're interested in is their perceptions of where candidates are on a bunch of issues and their own positions on those issues. So this is very basic political science stuff. We're going to ask people some issue questions, ask them, are they sort of towards the left or towards the right on this? And we were going to see if they moved on this over time. And we were going to do this because we essentially had 3 waves of a survey. We always say 3.1 because we got people's vote response ex post. This survey was conducted by YouGov, and we just got from them how everybody voted. But we're essentially going to look at attitude change from April to November. We had Twitter account information, right, David, where that little white dot on your block. And we're going to, again, look at these changes in views over time. And we're going to look at we like to look at number of tweets seen by media organizations. Now, we don't actually observe that. We just know that people follow what media organizations people follow. And we're going to hope that's a proxy for what they see. We're going to code the ideology of the tweets as being based on the author of the tweets. And so essentially, and this is, again, as David mentioned, the Pablo Barbera scores are the basis of all this. And we are going to code these tweets for what issue they're about. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to estimate the effects of tweets seen, and we're going to look at a model of the respondents' placement of Trump, Clinton, and themselves on a whole mess of issues. And on the right-hand side of that model, we're going to condition on a lot of things. And I just want to emphasize that, we can't claim any rock-solid causal inference, but we are going to condition on a whole lot of things here, including their traditional media consumption, whether they tell us they watch Fox, CNN, CBS, NBC, things like that. And what I'm showing you here are the effects of the tweet seen. And we're going to look at tweets seen from conservative media, which in the weird modern American representation are in red, and liberal media in blue. And the thing I want to point out to you is that most of those things are not zero. They're typically, if you look at, we have a bunch of issues. I'm not going to go into the details on them. Immigration, Muslim ban, build a wall. These are the greatest hits from 2016. And most of these things are not zero. People who saw a bunch of tweets on these topics tended to actually move their own views on this, relative to people who aren't seeing these tweets on these topics from these media. This is a little bit the opposite of what our conjecture was. We thought people might move their placements of the candidates based on what they were seeing, and that didn't happen. Here I'm showing you the same models, but now the outcomes are where they think Clinton and Trump are. And people just moved very little on where they placed Clinton and Trump based on tweets seen. So this was a surprise to us. And another thing we looked at in terms of tweets people saw, and this is now, I want to go from information to misinformation. We looked to see the impact of exposure to Russian Internet Research Agency tweets. These are the IRA trolls from 2016. And I'm just going to give you the short version of this paper. There was no impact. And people saw, and this is a consistent finding in the literature here, people are exposed to very little misinformation, and it's wildly concentrated. This is a graph of how many people, how many tweets people saw on average from these IRA trolls. Now you might think, wait, how do you interpret the magnitude here? That's a really good question. So look at this graph instead, where on the far left is how many tweets people saw from traditional media sources, and on the far right, I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor rolling over it, you can see the Russian foreign influence tweets. And there are just remarkably few of these tweets. And on top of that, they are seen primarily by strong Republicans. So this is one of these things on the ethical issue of your research. I sort of wonder, you know, if this research were read by Putin, and I worked for the IRA troll farm here, I would be really worried about things at the moment. But we published this anyway, and we don't really know who read it. Okay, in recognition of time, I'm going to jump over our British election study, which was quite similar to the U.S. one in structure. We had a panel, and here we're looking at well, I guess I'm not jumping over it, whether or not people who see tweets on different issues become better informed about party positions. And it turned out they did. So this was kind of interesting to us that, okay, so people are actually learning in this case. On Twitter, we did some more recent stuff. We heavily oversampled Latinos, both in Spanish and English. And Marissa Abrahano at UCSD is the first author on the two papers I'm going to mention here. And we really found out that Latinos who relied on Spanish language social media were more likely to believe a set of false narratives that we looked at that were circulating during this election than Latinos who were relying on English language social media. And if you want to draw an inference about this, and one of the sort of folk wisdom going into this is, well, you know, fact checking is much worse on Spanish language media. And you know, this is kind of consistent with that notion. Well, yeah, if it is, that could explain this. And, you know, so if you just want one more reason to worry about the disappearance of fact checking, you could read this short paper. We had a similar result in a paper that's going to be coming out in PRQ, where here the outcome for us was belief in fraud. That is the only misinformation thing we looked at, and very similar result. Looking at if you're relying on Spanish language social media, more likely to believe in fraud in 2020. Not that there's a shortage of people who believed in fraud in 2020. Okay, 2016 was a million years ago in social media time. So we'll try to get to 2024. And I'm really happy to say I want to thank you for the scheduling this panel, because by putting it after the lunch break, I was able to merge in some data on social media consumption. So I have one coefficient for you at the end of this talk. Okay, but what I'm going to talk about a little bit more is, again, in 2024, there's social media and there's also the economy. And inflation was a huge thing in the US in 2022. I think, you know, for the set of folks who, you know, the people who study social media tend to be a younger set of folks than I think study, you know, the median age of political scientists. But if you're old enough to remember, the last time we had inflation in the US was like 1980. Like, inflation was a big deal in 2022. And the point I always try to make when I talk about this is a huge fraction of Americans don't save anything. And that means if prices go up by 10% and their wages don't go up by 10%, that's 10% less consumption. That is like a real hit. The economists always talk about inflation in the sense of, well, it's just a nominal number, you know, it's just prices go up and wages go up. The effect could be zero. But a 10% decrease in your purchasing power, again, if your wages don't go up, that's not zero. That's like a giant hit. This is like, you know, people feeling pain. And if we go to one of these, you know, questions, are you better off or are you worse off than you were 4 years ago? If your income drops 10%, you know, a lot of other positive things have to happen in your life for you to be better off. Okay, so let me get into what we did. Instead of asking people, what did you think about inflation? We didn't want to know what they thought about it, other than we'll try to get some surveillance knowledge here. But we are going to ask, did it affect them? So we just asked a very simple question. Did the increase in prices in 2021 and 2022, so don't try to use the word inflation here, cause you to change your spending habits? And then we followed this. If they said yes, well, did it change how much food you bought, what types of food you bought? We were wondering if people, got out of the business of buying these $12 cartons of eggs or whatever. And we had a couple of other options for them. And here are the percentage respondents saying yes to any of these things. And by the way, this is these bottom four numbers, the 56, 62, 67, 6. Those aren't conditioned on having said yes. Like it is. So when 73% of people said it caused them to change their spending habits, that means the vast majority of those people, okay, about 90% of them said it changed what type of food they bought. So again, this is a huge number of people being affected. Okay, so what do I want to look at? I want to first look at the conditional relationship between partisanship and what I'm going to call these sort of behavioral responses on inflation. And one of the things I just want to point out is that it's much weaker than the similar relationship between partisanship and the response to, did the national economy got better? And I think, as Lynn pointed out yesterday, and in which, we've all known for quite a while, this huge relationship between people's partisanship and what they say, how they say the economy is doing. There is still a relationship between partisanship and the answers to this question. So whether or not, there is, it's a bit of a strange thing, when you ask people about their behavior, is partisan motivated reasoning still kicking in? Maybe it is, but it's kicking in a lot less. The coefficients we get down here are ballpark, half or a third the size of the coefficients we get here. But still, again, this model is conditioning on income and things, and so we think what's driving this does seem to be partisanship, which doesn't necessarily make sense. Again, unless people, for whatever reason, partisan motivated reasoning just confuses them about their own prior actions. Okay, so what happens if we model vote choice as a function of these things? Well, if you just look at sort of individual models, where again we've sort of basic stuff on the right hand side of partisanship and age, income, gender, the coefficient of inflation behavior. And when I say individual models, what I mean here is I'm throwing in one of these two economic measures at a time. And the inflation behavior coefficient is a third the size of the coefficient for the National Economic Evaluation, where they're both coded to be binary variables. If you put them both in, it's sort of interesting. The coefficients are approximately the same size, but it turns out that, and you're getting much more explanatory power from the National Economic Evaluation. That's kind of what we'd expect. I mean, we know politics is baked into that measure. So this is, unfortunately, as far as we've gotten with this particular measure today. But I just want to point out that, inflation was a big deal. People could tell us that it did something to them. So again, in this notion, are people confused about the economy? I don't think these people are confused when they tell you that, yeah, inflation made them change their habits. I don't, again, PMR aside, I don't think the media convinced them that they changed their habits. Okay, we then did actually try to find out about surveillance knowledge, and this is where we will get directly into the impact of media. And we told them, look, in 2022, the U.S. had an inflation rate of 8%, and we explained to them what that meant. And then we said, okay, so how much do you think prices rose in the last 12 months? The answer is about something like 3.5%. Sorry, I don't have the exact number in front of me here. So the right answer thus is prices increased somewhere between 1% and 5%. And now we create a measure that's just people who thought inflation is higher than it was. So these are people who, for whatever reason, thought inflation was over 5%. And so we might estimate a model of inflation high as a function of several things: income, education, partisanship. And here we're going to go with self-report of watching Fox News at least several times a week. And I'm giving you the coefficient on watching Fox News. It's not exactly super big here. You might have thought that, Fox would have convinced people that inflation is really, really high. And by the way, one thing to point out, that the model is terrible. Like, we do really bad at predicting whether or not people overestimate inflation. I'm actually quite surprised at that, given that you would think if you've got income education, you would do not so bad here. We can talk later about errors that could be caused because partisanship just messes it up. People do badly. Okay, what about social media consumption? So this is hot off the presses. So this is, by the way, I'm sorry I didn't say this. This is based on, again, a YouGov survey. We're working with panel data here. A lot of these people, though not nearly as many as we would like, obviously, are folks we interviewed in 2016, 2018, 2020, 2022. So we're going to get a measure of ideology for the accounts that our respondents followed, and suggesting they might have seen a lot of tweets from either the left or the right. And because of the small sample size here, I'm working with the ideology of all the accounts they followed, not just media. And we're, again, hoping it's a proxy. So we're going to estimate the same model as a function of the same stuff, but instead of self-report, these are the actual, the average published score of the accounts they followed. And the interesting thing here is that the coefficient of the published score is substantially higher. And even if we compare it to, now I'm going to look at, we run the previous model where we just do the self-report for Watch Fox on the same set of observations. This is a much smaller set of observations. It's only the people who gave us social media data. Just for comparison. And if I run a model with both measures, this was quite striking to me. Maybe in hindsight, that just means I have bad intuition. That the estimate of the published score is much larger than watching Fox. Now, that might be because it's a bigger decision to be, on Twitter, that you actually decide, I'm going to follow Fox. Maybe that's not as big a deal as watching Fox. Though our watching Fox here is watch Fox News at least several times a week. It's not like you once in a blue moon do this. So again, the inference we're drawing here is that, yeah, when it comes to actually, not forming an opinion of something per se, but your perception of what a fact of the world is, that yeah, media consumption could matter here. Okay. When I submitted, I think I sent Mike an abstract, way back in August or whatever. And I said, yeah, we're going to use this panel. We're going to look at how people change their views over time. We haven't gotten very far here. But I want to just show one thing, because this is sort of interesting to us. Trump's been around a long time at this point. And one of the weird things about Trump is he's run as a Republican 3 times now. He's not a Republican, and placing him in the traditional left-right scale might be a little bit hard. But this graph, if you read from bottom to top, goes from 2016 to 2024. And this is the same set of respondents in this graph. And you see a nice, solid rightward drift in these folks. They seem to be picking up on the fact that Trump is more conservative than he may have let on. Okay, I'm going to totally shift gears on you to throw one other thing in about, again, sort of favorite topic, the economy and inflation. We've got another project where we've looked at tweets about the economy. And again, as David says, we are, looking at these folks, looking for their keys, where the light is shining. But our line about Twitter is, look, there will likely always be some public micro-blogging platform. And this is people choosing to make statements in public. And the interesting thing about tweets is you can find topics. And so we can look at measures of inflation and unemployment for tweets by respondents. And we're going to compare mentions during 2 periods, 2018 and 2022. In 2018, Trump is president, and neither inflation nor unemployment is a huge deal at this point. You might brag about unemployment more if you're the president. In 2022, Biden's president, inflation is higher than it's been in 40 years. Unemployment is decreasing substantially lower than during the pandemic or preceding period. So we have clear expectations. Everybody's going to talk about inflation in 2022. It's big news. But we think Democrats are going to be more likely than Republicans to mention unemployment because it's the good news about the economy, and Republicans will be more likely than Democrats to mention inflation. And this is absolutely what happens here. This is the cell entries are the counting here is a little bit weird, but it's you can think of it as the mean mentions by individual. It's multiplied by something to get that, but go with that as the way to interpret it. And I think the important thing here is that in 2022, Democrats mentioned inflation 7 times more than unemployment. And you might say, oh, they're not doing a good job as partisan as cheerleaders, or where'd PMR go? But if you look at Republicans, they're mentioning inflation 22 times more than employment. And this is not a genetic characteristic of Republicans. Back in 2018, Republicans mentioned inflation 1/4 as much as unemployment, whereas Democrats were mentioning inflation more than unemployment. So in some sense, this is a kind of a boring result because it's super consistent with our expectations. But sometimes it's interesting to find out that your expectations are correct. It's sort of gathering evidence. And again, it certainly looks like, oh, we've got cheerleading going on when people choose to tweet. And it's sort of interesting for those of us who study social media. It remains a fascinating question: is why the heck do people bother to say anything on social media about politics? Like, what are they trying to do? And so this is one of the ways we try to get at it, is like when we see people choosing to do something that is or is not in line with their partisanship. So at that odd juncture, I'm done. So thank you all. I look forward to comments.
Thanks, Jonathan. I was going to say that, we'll be happy to schedule another conference if it'll give you a deadline to get the next wave of this done.
Look forward to the next conference, Mike.
Okay. Next up is Mindy Romero. Mindy.
All right. Well, I'm just going to echo some of the comments that have already been made today. First off, of course, just very appreciative of the fact that this conference is continuing, and that you're able to make the transition under the incredibly, enormously challenging circumstances to virtual. And I think it's been amazing. And thank you for including all of us in making this happen. So I'm going to start off and just acknowledge that I'm actually subbing in today for my colleague, Jennifer Gaudet. She is the one that submitted this presentation, and I'm presenting her slides. So I want to give credit where credit is due. And the presentation is on behalf of a larger research team. And actually, the presentation that I'm going to give today is on a new element of a very large research study that's been multi-year, going back to at least 2021. And the team has been led by Thad Kauser, is still led by Thad Kauser at UC San Diego. In addition to Jennifer, who's at UC San Diego, but next year, wonderfully so, will be new faculty at UC Riverside. Also Seth Hill of UC San Diego, Mackenzie Lockhart now of Yale, Lauren Uribe, at UC San Diego, Jennifer Bedreau of UC Davis, and Jennifer Morolla, and I believe both Thad and Jennifer are on the Zoom today, but Jennifer Morolla, of course, is from UC Riverside. So a large group, lots of research that has come out of this collaboration led by Thad. And all of the work, multiple studies, multiple publications, including what I'm going to present here in a moment, but all of the research has a common thread. So of course, we're looking at impacts on the level of trust in elections that Americans have, but specifically looking at can public information campaigns restore trust in American elections? And we've been partnering with election officials across the US in a number of states and jurisdictions, testing messages that they themselves have produced that they've been using on the ground in their jurisdictions to counter misinformation, specifically election fraud. We've been testing those messages, found a lot of positive impacts from that, which I'll touch on in a moment. But essentially, right, that trying to understand what messages work in terms of positively impacting or how they may be impacting levels of trust, but also specific elements of those research, kind of what aspects of those messages from election officials, what aspects work maybe more than others, right? And that research obviously is done in partnership with them to not only inform our field, but to inform the work of election officials on the ground. All right. So let me go ahead and share my slides. Can everybody, oh, boy, so sorry. I know how to use Zoom. Okay. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, we need you to go to presentation mode.
Oh, I am, yeah. But I just saw them pop on. So you can see them in full presentation mode now, right?
Perfect. Yep.
Yeah.
You're all
Yeah, just a little bit of a delay. All right, so jumping in, and again, this particular work is brand new, not yet published. We're still working through it as a team, led by Jennifer as well, and we're looking at counter framing and persistence of election messaging and trust in American elections. So the motivation for this element of the research is pretty straightforward. So we know from the previous research that we've done that simple, fact-based messages from election officials increase voter trust in elections. And when we say simple, by and large, we're talking about very nuts and bolts, kind of low production value messages, videos produced by election officials that talk about, the security integrity of the election and those having the largest impact. Again, lots of research that we produced on that. We know that providing information on how elections are conducted and secured significantly increases voter trust in elections, and that the effects are not limited by partisanship. And here we go. There's a couple of studies just from this past year that have been published. And so if these messages matter independent of each other, how are they interacting in the real world where people are getting maybe both messages, many messages, right, coming at them? And since messaging campaigns don't consist of one-offs, does consistent pro-election integrity messaging strengthen effects? So basically, can these messages survive in the real world, and for how long? So again, our specific questions for today are: one, do messages from election officials survive counter arguments from election deniers? So that's the counter framing question. Number two, does election integrity messaging have strong, lasting effects? That's the persistence question. Research design, pretty straightforward. Two-wave, pre-registered in advance panel study fielded through Bovitz. The N 4,500, 75% retention rate, and respondents were recruited before the 2024 election. And we're tested counter framing with randomized treatment groups, tested persistence by recontacting respondents 1 week later. And we're using the SPAE measures of trust to fit convergent research structure across multiple studies for consistency. And each treatment was randomized independently from the others. And in terms of the questions, if you're not familiar with these questions, I will run you through them. Number one, how confident are you that your vote in the 2024 presidential election will be counted as you intend? Number two, think about vote counting throughout your county or city and not just your own personal situation. How confident are you that votes in your county or city will be counted as voters intended? And now think about vote counting throughout your state. How confident are you that votes in your state will be counted as voters intend? And fourth, finally, thinking about vote counting throughout the country, how confident are you that votes nationwide will be counted as intended? And I should say this study, as well as the larger number of studies, as I told you, as part of a group, have all been generously funded through MEDSL and through ETI. All right. In terms of the response values, pretty straightforward, right? Not all, or not at all, not too, somewhat, very confident. We did pre-register our don't knows as unscored. So the don't knows are excluded from the analysis. Of course, happy to take comments or questions about why that is the case. And of course, the same responses for all questions. Oh, oops, go back one. There we go. I'm going to try to show just a snippet of both of these. In a moment, I'll walk you through the structure of both of the waves, wave 1 and wave 2. But I want to first just show you a snippet of each of these videos. Don't know if this is going to work. We'll give it a try.
Have you ever wondered about how we secure?
I'm going to stop that for a second. Did people hear that?
Yep.
Oh, good. Well, that was easier than I thought. Okay. So the first video is the Election Assistance Commission video, the EAC. This is our pro-election integrity video.
Elections? That's a fair question. Security has always been at the heart of what election officials do, which is why each state and jurisdiction has measures in place to ensure security in all phases of the election process. Most people don't see the behind-the-scenes work that makes it happen, but today we're giving you a peek. Let's start with voter registration, which is a security measure in itself. Registration ensures that only those meeting state eligibility requirements are able to.
Yeah, I'll stop there. It gives you a sense of the video and what it covers and the tone. Again, EAC produced. The second video, so we're calling it the Trump debate video. Many of you may have seen this debate. It was a one and only debate between President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President Harris. And during that debate, he did discuss briefly election fraud, or made claims about election fraud. So this is our pro-election fraud video.
We have to have borders and we have to have good elections. Our elections are bad. And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote. They can't even speak English. They don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote. And that's why they're allowing them to come into our country.
All right. I trust that you were able to hear both videos. Yes?
Yes, good.
Half of, thank you. I also see half of Mike's head nodding up and down. That's awesome. All right. There we go. Okay, so wave 1 and wave 2. So pretty straightforward here. Wave 1, we have 4 groups. Group 1 only saw the EAC video for election security, the one I just showed you. Group 2 only saw Donald Trump debate video on election fraud. Group 3 saw the EAC election video followed by the Trump debate video. And then, of course, the group 4 was our control group. They saw a Honda commercial. And then in wave 2, or for wave 2, the same questions were asked just 1 week later. And each treatment, of course, was randomized independently from the others. All right. Now I'm going to give you just bottom line takeaways here. This is first, I'm going to talk about the counterframing results, excuse me. But to explain briefly, the table on the right, we're looking at the effect of EAC and Trump messages on change in pre-registered outcomes and same wave as treatment was delivered. So pre-treatment outcomes here from wave 1 are subtracted from proposed treatment outcomes from wave 1. Bottom line takeaways. The EAC message that you saw has significant positive effects on confidence in states voting or vote counting and national vote. Again, these are the highlights. Trump message has significant negative effects on trust that respondents' own vote will be counted accurately. And a key finding here is that seeing the Trump message does not negate significant positive effects of the EAC video. Does not negate. Let's talk about persistence. So again, I'm going to give you some bottom line takeaway here in a moment. But on the right, we're looking at the effect of EAC and Trump messages on change in pre-registered outcomes in second wave. 1 week, again, after treatment, pre-treatment measures from wave 1 are subtracted from wave 2 values. So key finding, effects are substantially small a week later and unable to distinguish from 0. And magnitude is in line with half-life decay, but greater power in each group if necessary, which is something that we're talking about as a group in terms of our continued analysis, how to potentially increase the power through some exploratory work. And last slide, key takeaways. So election integrity messaging stands up in the real world against countervailing messaging. So that means that ads from election officials can counter, at least as we've tested from the EAC, can counter an election fraud message. But effects of the single ad do not persist over the week or over a week, appear to have some half-life, but significant full effects does not remain. And then lastly, campaigns are likely necessary to keep these messages salient. We say are likely just because obviously we're continuing this research and more research needs to be done. But we think that, as is the case in many aspects of our society and different institutions, the messaging that goes out to the public to inform them of, again, of a variety of topics often has to be, right, is understood, right, has to occur in multiple instances, right, over time. And that appears to be the case here with the public information messaging specific to elections. And that is my last slide. So I'll go ahead and
Great,
Thank you all very much.
Since you're on, I'll start with a couple of questions for you and your team. Obviously, a couple of your colleagues are on, so they can
Please.
also jump in too. Betty, I don't think any of our colleagues from the EAC are here. That was an actual EAC video?
Yes.
Okay, I'm actually kind of surprised that it has much of an effect at all, because it seemed, I mean, it seemed like it was like AI voiced, and I mean, relative to the Trump ad, I mean, that the Trump ad is a lot more powerful, in particular if you're receptive to the Trump message, right? So I'm just curious about why, why use these two really very different kinds of ads in a study like this?
It's a very good question. And I should note that there's also a difference in length. The Trump segment from the debate is, I think, about 30 seconds or so. And the EAC video is about 2 minutes. Because I've got Jennifer and I've got Thad on, please, Thad, feel free to jump on in as he's navigated many of these conversations that we've had around this, including your question. So we had multiple conversations about the appropriate, what types of videos we should be showing from Trump, whether they're, official behind the podium, right? Something from 2020, should it be something more recent, tone, content, lengths, all of that. And we also just had some, I think part of our decision was limitations in terms of the videos that were available to us, right? That might not fall into the too terribly incendiary. Now that's in the eye of the beholder. You see the EAC video and it maybe, we won't tell them that you might be critiquing them, but I think the EAC video is very well done and very factual. And we know from our previous research that the nuts and bolts kinds of videos produced by election officials tend to have the greatest impact. So I wasn't as surprised myself on the EAC video, but Thad, please jump in on whatever you want to add there.
Sure. Thanks so much, Mindy. And just really briefly, Mike, we shared exactly your intuition at the beginning of this project. And what we've seen going back to 2002 is that these low production value videos, something that Charles Stewart calls affectionately hostage videos, where you just see an election official staring at the screen. So for instance, in our BJPS article, we tested two that were from other states with a national audience. Virginia's Democracy Defended, very high production value, very beautiful video. Maricopa County's Fill in the Blanks, another cartoon video. It was equally effective. And what we see is sort of no difference. And we had found the EAC video from one of those past studies to be very effective. And then finally, for the Trump video, there's a question of, would this be effective? Well, we decided that we didn't have a good intuition about what Trump videos would land. So we did a pilot study testing a month before this testing 3 different Trump things: his speech from the White House Rose Garden, a speech at a rally, and this debate one. They were each effective, and this was the most effective.
Thanks, Thad. Yeah.
Yeah, because Joanne had a completely different expectation than I did. One of the questions that came up in chat too, since I've got you both on, is I didn't see this in the regression tables. Did you subset by party ID, or did you interact by party ID at all in terms of the efficacy of these two different ads? Didn't look.
Oh yeah, thank you. What we're presenting is not. I think that we're still exploring that. Thad, do you remember where Jennifer left off?
So I think my memory is that we did not pre-register that. We pre-registered that in all our past ones. We found these were as effective or more effective with Republicans, but I think if we didn't pre-register it, it's worth doing an exploratory analysis, because there's reason to believe that different videos would move people in different directions. It's a good point. We'll write that down. And
that's why I use the word exploratory, because I know we hadn't pre-registered it. Yeah, thank you.
And I guess the last question I've got, since I got you both on, is at the end when you close, you mentioned that you think that it's going to be interesting as next steps to look at the further durability, right, of exposure to an ad like this. You're going to look at maybe something like a kind of a dose effect. I mean, like repetition. I mean, is it going to be? Is it really that a single ad is going to, have an effect 3 months later, or is there something about repetition, like a campaign, right, as you mentioned, right, where someone sees an ad or a very similar kind of ad repeatedly, even over a very short period of time?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this work has unfolded over the last several years, right? And so now we're really in earnest examining the questions of persistence, and we will pursue additional work in this area. But right now we're still focused on the results from this survey as we've structured it, and again, not yet complete in terms of the analysis. But Dad, do you want to add anything?
Just that I agree. My mental model of how ads work is flow from progressive. You hit people over and over and over again in repetition, and that's also an important part of campaign strategy. And I think what we're finding, and this, I think, at least my understanding fits with some of your initial findings with the paper that Mitchell presented, was that some of these effects, or at least their broad effects in your study, are not as durable as one would hope. And so that means you've got to do really as a campaign rather than thinking of it as a single vaccine that will inoculate people forever going forward.
Yeah, I think that's been an issue going back kind of that line of work where people have not really looked at that pre-bunk or repetition of the pre-bunking arguments. So sorry, Mindy, I interrupt.
Oh, no, just absolutely, right. Additional time, work, and funding allow us to explore this further. Yeah. But I agree with your intuition, of course. Yeah.
Funding. We need more funding for this kind of work.
Yeah.
So Paul Gronke had a couple of comments in chat. I think one is particularly interesting, which is, this is I think a really interesting way to think about how do we move voter confidence, but the changes don't seem very large. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, do you think that again, a more prolonged, sustained effort would produce kind of a bigger boost in confidence? Different messages are going to produce a bigger boost in confidence. Is anything, I know this is asking you to speculate outside of what you've done, but I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts.
Well, maybe Thad, we can both take it. I was just going to say the initial work that we've done that is not looking at persistence. We have actually found pretty significant increases in trust levels, again, across the board for both Republicans and Democrats, starting at different starting points, if you will, but significant change. Dad, do you want to add anything? I mean, I think in terms of the persistence, 1 week later, we didn't know what we would find, right? We pre-registered hypotheses, but I don't think we're necessarily surprised by the challenges in staying power. Thad, what, you going to add something it looked like?
Yeah, I mean, our treatment effects have ranged on the low end from some 2.3 percentage point changes in the percent of people say they sort of mostly are often trust elections for when you look at things about a different jurisdiction. And then when we ask people with ads that are focused on their jurisdiction, like LA County people with the Dean Logan ad, we've seen there our treatment effects have ranged in size typically from about 5 to about 11 percentage points. That's a pretty large effect, but I think some of them were done either after or between elections. This was done in the week leading up to an election that was with a very crowded media environment. And I think maybe the fact that it has lower effects here than this exact ad has shown in the summer of 2023 is a useful caveat that sometimes effects are not as large as we see in survey experiments that are less connected to the reality of a campaign.
In the reality of the ongoing media environment during an election, the heated election, yeah.
Right. The one last comment I had, I know this goes back to your comment, Mindy, about we need more funding for research in this area. But one of the things I know that had happened in the 2024 election cycle on the political side was that there were PACs that had come into the game where they were literally doing very large, massive online testing of ads. People could literally, from different campaigns, could upload their ads and have them tested quickly to determine the efficacy. And they were basically then able to figure out what's more effective and what's not. And I'm just wondering if, maybe somebody, you all, should propose building some kind of platform like that for election officials where they could take these ads, upload them, have them quickly tested for their efficacy, and see if there aren't easy things that you can advise to help them improve the efficacy of these ads. That might be a super cool idea. I don't know.
It's a super cool idea. And I think Thad has done a fantastic job of just trying to disseminate this research. And then that's the bulk of what we're learning in terms of the commonalities of the successful messages, trying to help other jurisdictions. But what you've suggested is obviously a step beyond. And yeah,
Yeah, we
I think
did
that
that for
makes-
Tommy Gong. Sorry, we did that for Tommy Gong before he launched their media campaign in Contra Costa, and so they hopefully thought that was helpful. But I think that's a great idea that this could be scaled through a platform that would be what would be necessary to really put it into broad effect. That's a great idea.
And Tommy just piped up in chat and said yes, election officials would agree to that as well. So thank you, Tommy. Thank you all. So I'm going to switch over to David. And there was a lot of conversation in chat. I raised the question about the Hawthorne effect. There was a lot of conversation about representativeness. I don't know. Do you want to say any more about that? Because I do have a couple of other questions that have come up.
Yeah, I mean, we are working on ways to evaluate how peculiar our sample is. We've developed a lot of methods over the years running the CHIP 50 survey, but in this case, we really want to compare our survey, at least our survey answers to ANAS and the like, but that doesn't deal with the fact that people might modify their behaviors. I doubt that behavior modification will be long-standing as the chat went, that people might remember that for days or maybe weeks, but if they're in our panel for months, I don't think that that they would continue to modify their behavior. But
so one thing that someone asked was it might be difficult to infer a lot here about younger internet users because they tend to use mobile apps, right, rather than browsers. To what extent that you've got data, for example, on Android use, these kind of concerns could be alleviated, but Android is just a small fraction of the young internet using population. Have you looked at kind of validations or somehow looked at younger internet users in terms of kind of validating this data and this platform for studying them?
Yeah, so first of all, note that we have both Android and iOS data collection. iOS lagged because there was a much more active research ecosystem for Android than for iOS. iOS is a pain to work with. And if anyone knows folks who work at Apple, let us know, because a challenge for all of this is that we have to get all of our data collection approved by Google Play Store, Apple Store, and the Chrome Store, which and Apple has been the hardest nut to crack. But we have we will look at, or we have the ability to look at think, for example, relationship between self-report data and observational data, how that differs by age cohort and so on. But we will actually be getting a pretty comprehensive view of everyone, because we do have all these devices. The problem is that we can't look within apps nearly as much on mobile. We can see what apps people are using, but we can't see what Google is showing them, for example. We can literally see what people's searches are and what those search results are in Chrome. You cannot do, well, there's some ways to do that to some extent, even on Android and iOS. But we'll be able to evaluate that. There is no great ground truth to compare any of these things to. That's the problem. It's like our data will be the best data out there, which, I'm not bragging about. It's just the reality. There are probably some industry sources that we can look at, but the industry sources themselves are quite flawed. So we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of ways to triangulate among messy sources to see how we do relative to other problematic sources of data and behavior.
So one of the things that I've always been struck by is how important the use of social media data has been for studying elite behavior, legislative behavior, again, because that's a place where we actually get something like the universe and the full population. Are you all thinking about building this out in that direction so that, again, because, not only do we have difficulty now getting X data about, just individuals like you and I, but we have difficulty getting X data about legislators and elites, which again have been widely studied. And I think we've learned a lot about legislative behavior and elite behavior from social media data.
Yeah, no, it's sort of crazy to think that it's now difficult to collect data on what your member of Congress or what members of Congress are tweeting, right? But the, you know, that's more doable because there are ways to get around some of these limits at small levels, and all members of Congress put together aren't actually tweeting that much. And so there are actually some ways to get around that, which I won't go into in a recorded format. But you know, we can see what people see of elite behavior. It's always there's a value in like what elites say matter whether or not people see it or not, because there's a way in which that's an indicator of what elites are thinking and how they're strategizing, how they view the world. But we can see, one of the things that we can see is what elite expressions. We can look at what people are seeing on. We can see, we're collecting X data. We can see what elite statements people are seeing on X. It would be great. I think Betsy had a suggestion that we get creators, people who share a lot of content in our panel, and I think that's a great idea. It would have a somewhat different objective than like trying to get a quasi-representative sample of mass behavior. But I think that's actually a brilliant idea that we should think about how to pursue.
Yeah, and Christian Gross just kind of chimed in on that too in the chat. You know, again, that's been such a valuable source of, this has been a valuable source of data for studying elite behavior.
Yeah, if we could get Taylor Swift, we're good. So
right there, Taylor Swift. Can you walk through a little bit exactly how one would go about getting access to the NIO? There was quite a bit of back channel conversation when you were presenting about we were all taking notes trying to figure it out. So how would I go about, say, getting access to this, like if I wanted to start working with it next week?
You couldn't, because the reality is we're stress testing access right now. We don't want this to be buggy, and so we've asked a few people, mainly on our board and so on, to stress test it. Actually, Jonathan, by the way, is on our board. But to report back what issues they see, because there is no product. This is going to have flaws throughout, but we don't want it to have lots and lots of bugs on day one when we open the doors up more widely. So what we hope by this summer, we will be able to put out an RFP for people to apply for access. There will be then an online form to fill out, and some of it will be sort of looking at the, what are you proposing, evaluating the burden it puts on our system. So unfortunately, right now, we do not have GPUs. Everything is stored at Northeastern. We do not have GPUs. That was not something we budgeted for when we put the proposal together 4 years ago. We weren't thinking LLMs. We did not have that foresight, and GPUs are expensive. And so if someone's saying, well, we need to run lots of LLMs on your system, that's going to be difficult. It's not possible. It's possible at a low scale, but not at a huge scale. So we have to evaluate that, and also there's sort of some ethics process to go through and so on. But basically, there would be an application process, something like an IRB process, but different, with somewhat different questions that we'll put out there. But first, there will be like an RFP. We'll have to prioritize. We probably, 500 people want to use the system. We have bandwidth limits, so there's only so many people we can support, and we don't even know what that number is. But my hope is that come this summer, we will open the doors up wider, and then we will evaluate the problems that we confront. I will admit that things will not be perfect on day one. We're going to try our best, but like we've had to build like a whole infrastructure, a whole service provision, data science team, engineering team, multiple engineering teams, because mobile, Android is different from iOS, is different from Chrome, and so on. So we've had to build a massive team, and then cycle it all through our ethics advisors, and then go back, to our social scientists and so on. So it's been a journey. But the objective really is this summer, by this summer, to be calling for proposals. This is why, if you put your name on the list that I gave you the link to, we would make sure you're on the list to receive the announcements for the initial RFP.
Okay, but it'll be something like an IRB kind of process.
That's right. There will be an internal IRB. You also have to go through your IRB, but really our stuff, human ethics research does not deal well with informational burdens, privacy burdens, and so we like people. You can't remove our data from our systems. It will be in a secure data enclave because it's just too sensitive. And so we are learning lessons, for example, from All of Us and so on about their All of Us is this big electronic health record process to study health data. So I think it will be an IRB style process.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Jonathan, we got a couple of questions for you. One that came up was, in addition to the changes in the partisan production of content, do you see differences in the popularity of the content? So like, for example, it seems that the inflation content that was produced more by Republicans in 2022 was favorable. But the content's more familiar with their audience. So do you have the ability to look into that? Have you looked at that?
We do have the ability to look at that. We haven't looked at engagement with the content. Yeah, that's an interesting point. We did just look at production. It follows the usual pattern. What we're going to guess is that Republicans then liked all the stuff they saw saying, yeah, inflation is terrible and it's all Biden's fault, and Democrats were less likely to do that. But yeah, we haven't looked at that yet. That's an interesting point.
So in the social media mentions, you haven't looked at 20 looks like, though.
I'm sorry, say again?
It looked like you only had 2020 and 2022 data in your social media mentions for inflation and unemployment. You haven't looked at 2024 yet?
This goes to the Twitter apocalypse.
The one at the end, like table, I think it might have been table 2.
Yeah, no. We can thank Elon Musk for this one.
Okay.
Once Twitter data became much harder to access, what we were doing was collecting all tweets with a fairly large set of keywords about the economy. Yeah. And that was, obviously that became unfeasible at the end of the period where we showed you data. So we could be looking at a little sample and do some things, but that's why we stopped there.
Okay. And the last question I had was that you talked a lot about that. I thought it was really interesting, that analysis about perceived inflation, right? But it did seem to me that later on, and I think it might have been that table 2 again, that there's a lot of partisan heterogeneity in perceptions of inflation. But it could also be that people might really have legitimately experienced inflation in different ways, depending on where you live, depending upon your situation, what you're buying, right? There could be people who did experience inflation rates that might have been higher than 3%, some maybe lower than 3%, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, good point to bring up, because that was a question that was pretty much literally about the national inflation rate is what it implies, when the whole point of what we're trying to look at is, yeah, everything is very heterogeneous, and the reason we asked them about the food stuff is, what did you experience? Like, what happened to you? And so, yeah, in hindsight, it would have been a good idea, I think, to ask that question a little bit, ask different variations of that question. And we can try to look at, look a little bit. We had thought about looking at the education level there in terms of, literally sort of knowledge here, that like, look, people who are better educated and have more income, they probably just read the New York Times and know what the inflation rate is. But it also implies different experiences. And yeah, there's a really good suggestion. Wish we thought of that.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to do.
Yeah.
You've got an incredible wealth of data here. Yeah. We're all very jealous of how much data you have. So, well, thank you. I think that's the questions that I think we've collected. There have been some more in chat too. So please keep your eye on the chat. And by the way, for folks, we are gonna have access to the chat as when we get done with this session. So if there was anything that you missed, or you want to see some of the questions, just drop us a note. We'll be able to send those along to you. So thanks to David, Jonathan, and Mindy, and Thad.